Hey everyone, welcome to today's webinar, 5 Tips to Supercharge Your Compliance Programs in 2023. Before we get started, we just had a couple of housekeeping items. So please note, all participants except the panelists are muted. However, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat box. We really want this to be an engaging conversation and not just kind of a one-sided presentation. And lastly, an email with the link to the slides as well as the recording will be sent tomorrow. So please look out for that in your inbox. Next, I did want to share that we do have an ongoing survey right now around how to share your compliance technology plans for 2023. You can use that QR code right up on your screen and share that and take the survey. And additionally, I will provide the link to the survey in the chat box as well. And since we really want to get a bunch of survey respondents for this, we are doing an incentive today. So if you fill out the survey by end of day and provide your email address, we will email you a Starbucks gift card. So just another incentive to share your insights around your compliance technology plans. Now, of course, I just want to quickly mention a little bit about ClauseMatch. So we are an award-winning regulatory technology company that helps organizations manage their policy management lifecycle. So we support organizations across big enterprises like Barclays and BlackRock to smaller and mid-market organizations like Pleo, Currency Cloud, and PensionBee. And I do want to mention too that we are a global organization. So we have offices across the US, Europe, and Asia, and we do support almost 200,000 users from across 65 plus countries. So that's just a little bit about ClauseMatch. Now with that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague and our moderator for today, Justin J. War. So with that, take it away, Justin.
All right, thanks. I got the keys to the car now. This is good. Hello, everyone. I'm Justin J. War. It's a pleasure to be speaking with all of you. I hope you find this to be very informative, educational, and a little bit of fun. So that's the goal for today. I am, as you can see on the screen, an account executive here at ClauseMatch. So I have some broad knowledge about what compliance professionals such as yourselves and folks here on the panel are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So I hope to keep this conversation very free-flowing. Again, there will be some audience participation involved. So please keep your fingers ready at the typing. So you can participate along with the panel and see if what you're experiencing is similar to them. And we can keep this a very nice conversation amongst everybody, not just a lecture hall. So with that, I'd like to introduce all of the folks you see here on the panel. They'll say a little bit about themselves and their role and why they're here today. So we'll start with Eugenie and then kind of go down the line with Dominick, Mary, Conrad, and Dana. So Eugenie, please introduce yourself.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Justin, and thank you everyone else for joining the panel and I guess for attending the webinar. My name is Eugenie. I have a legal background and I always worked in compliance and operational sides of businesses, actually at financial services most. My expertise, I guess, is specifically in fintech and internationalizing existing businesses into new markets. I started working at an exchange-traded brokerage. I guess we offer software to consumers that normally was only open to an institutional investor. That really gave me lots of exposure with US markets and whatnot. Quite interesting role to start with. Then I moved into commodities brokerage, and then I guess fintech called me, and I worked for a couple of years in a fintech brokerage where I actually transformed the business again into a new market. But now I am actually joining from the ClauseMatch side, as you can see, which is quite interesting. I'm probably the most horrible customer on the on the books, but I'm both customer and actually doing compliance on the ClauseMatch side. I watch over the governance, risk, and compliance space. So interesting to hear from everyone's take. Yeah, please, Dominick, over to you.
Thank you. And thanks, Justin and team, for having me. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Dominick Campagna. I'm the VP of Sales at Ascent RegTech. Through AI and automation, we help financial services organizations build their obligation inventories that are tailored and very specific to their products, their services, and their entity information. we help keep them all up to date. So I work with organizations of all different sizes in banking, mortgage lending, investment advisors and broker dealers, and payment processors and more. So really excited to be here and to share some of our learnings. I'll hand it over to Mary.
Hi, thanks very much, Dominic. My name is Mary. I'm the Head of Culture of Integrity and Compliance Education at Fresenius Medical Care, which is a Fortune 500 dialysis company. I am also the co-host of the Great Women in Compliance podcast, which is aimed at advancing and empowering women in our field, as well as providing a knowledge sharing opportunity for all. And with that, I thank all of our male allies for supporting us. I'm really interested in today's topic. I love supercharging compliance programs so much that I have a book coming out next year on ideas for leveling up and supercharging your compliance program. Keep an eye out for it. And I love building my network as well. So if you'd like to be friends with me on LinkedIn, please look me up. Thank you so much. Passing it on to, I cannot recall who was next, maybe Dana.
Great, I can go ahead and jump in. Dana Lawrence here. Super excited to be with everyone. My background is 20 years in financial services, and the last 8 years I've spent building fintech startups, and the last year also dived into the crypto and Web3 space, and had a lot of leadership roles in compliance, enterprise risk management, experience kind of building, scaling, and remediating fun compliance issues. So glad to be here. And then Conrado, I think you're next.
Yes, thanks, Dana and the team. Hello, everyone. So I'm Conrad. I'm the head of compliance at Tide. For those of you who don't know, Tide is a UK-based fintech. So we basically provide SMEs with a lot of banking platforms and solutions for them to save money and time, basically to do what they do best and focus on their business. We're FCA regulated, so obviously, a lot of the things we'll be talking about here has a lot to do with that. And what are the things we're doing internally to this year and next year to make sure we are super compliant. My background is a legal background as well, so I was a solicitor for a good time of my professional experience, and then I made that transition into a fintech environment, sort of a in-house perspective. Really excited to be here.
Excellent. Thank you all for the quick introductions. And now we'll continue on to the bread and butter of today's conversation. So understanding some situations in compliance and how you can supercharge your compliance program. So one of the first things, just take a pause. Let's go back in the time machine here. Let's take a look about what are some things we've learned thus far in the past that are leading into 2023. So what we're focused on here is on in 2022, what are some things you've learned? What are some things that have surprised you that have stood out in the compliance space? There have definitely been some interesting things that have happened. So I'd like to start off with Dana. Dana, curious if you've learned anything about dealing with technology in general, trying to implement something or utilize something. What have you learned in regards to that?
Yeah, so thanks for that intro, and hopefully I can share some of my learnings that have been lessons learned the hard way, mistakes, but really upon reflecting in 2022, even 2021, and really for the last 8 years, building and scaling compliance organizations is, and this is literally not a plug for ClausMatch, but it's really going to sound like it. My learning is there were several instances when I could have implemented technology earlier. And I think in compliance organizations, sometimes, we are viewed as a cost center. We want the business wants to keep the costs down. And there have been times when going along with trying to save money, I was like, yeah, we got this, we can do this manually. But I think back specifically to the times where it really would have behooved us to set up a governance risk compliance or GRC software earlier. It would have behooved us to set up some sort of policy management tool earlier specific for that. I know there's a lot of great reg tech around marketing. So this literally is not a plug for ClausMatch, but I think one of the learnings that I'm really willing to share, and I'm not going to make the same mistakes again, is understanding what technology is available to make your life easier and figuring out how to explain that value to your leadership team when the budgeting process comes around. This is the type of stuff where you're either going to be doing it manually in some like horrendous spreadsheet, or you have a technology where you're literally going to save an FTE just because it has a better user interface. And my kind of second thing that dovetails into is, I think in 2022, at least in the US and the fintech and banking as a service space, the regulators are starting to catch up with some of the risks related to fintech, related to more innovative technology. And we recently had, there was a notable consent order by the OCC for failure to properly manage third-party risks. So I'll just drop that there. Understanding what all of your third parties are, whether you have fintechs that you're partnered with, and understanding what all those risks are. And there's so much to keep track of. Definitely getting yourself organized using a great software is my recommendation.
Well, in light of that, thank you, Dana. In light of that, Dominick, you're specifically dealing with that issue that Dana just discussed about regulations coming out at a very quickened pace, and how do you manage dealing with regulation changes? How do you update your compliance base? If you're doing everything very manually, it takes a lot of time. So curious what you're kind of hearing from and seeing with your clients and companies that you're working with, how they're managing that, and what kind of issues you're hearing based on what this past year.
Yeah, Dana made some really good points there, and thanks, Justin. I think what I've been seeing is, due to the new partnerships, innovation, consumer and regulator expectations, all this is happening just really fast pace. I think working in compliance is more stressful than ever. And with the pace that this is moving, the likelihood for human error leads to amount of reputational, financial risk, productivity loss, and business disruption. These in combination lead to a major impact on revenue. I saw a recent survey lately. It was about nearly 70% of compliance officers are just so stressed out about the pace of these changing regulations. And disruption is not over either in relation to product offerings themselves and regulation of new areas like open banking or big data, privacy, and as Dana mentioned, like the use of third parties. And on top of that, compliance teams are small and they don't have the same type of budget that IT or marketing teams have. All this complexity with no room for error, they're almost being asked to do something that's like nearly impossible. And I think as a learning, we all need to just really be better at communicating these challenges to executive stakeholders and the amount of reputational and financial risk we're really dealing with here, not only in the situations today, but what is to come into the future, and really planning for that. I think we have some great compliance tips later in this presentation that we're going to share that can help us prepare to have those types of strategic conversations with the right folks in the organization and start planning to put technology and tools in place.
Excellent. Thanks, Dominick. I think you make some really good points, because I also hear this from a lot of people that I speak with as well. Is in some instances the regulators are unaware of even what regulations put out in certain industries and spaces, particularly like in crypto and fintech, because the things are moving so quickly. How do we deal with that? And then if something happens, what do you do? How do you manage that? So I think those are some really good points and tips. For those of you out there, this is the first part of audience participation. Please share with us in the comments, if you could, what are some things that you've learned as well? Do you resonate with some of the things that Dana and Dominick have shared here? Or are there some other things that you've experienced that maybe we can touch on at the end of this presentation, and what we can circle back to? So let us know. But with that, love to move on to the next topic and talk a little bit about what are some compliance priorities for you all coming up in 2023. So as we're moving into the new year, Thanksgiving is right around the corner. I'm excited to eat some turkey, but that means New Year is also upon us, and there are new things coming out. So things to anticipate. We've actually here at ClauseMatch done a survey at various events that we've attended, reaching out to people who are attending those events and then broader at large. And some of the things we've already heard from compliance professionals, particularly some of you in the audience may agree. You can see on the screen here before you, but definitely how do we put something in place to make our lives easier, like Dana alluded to. So we're not having to do everything so manually, because as you can see from point 2, with things happening so quickly, how do we manage all of this? And I've actually spoken to a few folks this past week, and several of their biggest problems was we start working on one thing, something else comes up. Now we've got 2 things. We didn't finish the first thing. Now, how do we manage this? So these are the things that we're hearing from other people. I'm curious what the panel will say as well in regards to this. So I'd like to actually start with Eugenie. I'm curious, what are some of the things that you're seeing here, even at ClauseMatch, that you're trying to make a priority for us and our company, and then we'll see what the rest of the panel says.
To look first at what you mentioned about the survey, the part about the technology that comes out of many conversations that I have with colleagues. Naturally, I'm set there, right? So that gives me a bit of a good starting point. But what I will be focusing on a lot is even with your technology, with that goes the fact that you really need like a mindset shift across the business, and that is still something that you have to keep pushing and working hard at, because whatever area you work in, whatever level in the organization, you have touch points with compliance. It has to always be a second nature, or like an intuition that you bring it into whatever new idea you bring into the business, whatever it is, compliance touches it. So there are interventions, I think, like the regulator intervened with, say, SMCR. They really want everyone to take it on their role and their responsibilities, right? And I think that set the mood somewhat, and it keeps going with, I think, when you see what I think they're going to be mentioned, the tone of the regulator is set, and we keep continuing on that requirement that really everyone thinks it's their job to do compliance. So
I think, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Again, managing that, and from various different people. I know, Conrad, you're dealing with regulators quite often as well. So I'm curious, as you're dealing with the changes that are coming in and various different aspects of what Eugenie just mentioned, what are some of the things that you're seeing at TIE that are some priorities for yourself and your team moving into 2023?
Yeah, so I think picking up on what Eugenie was saying, right, and I couldn't agree with that more. I think I really like where she said, the change of mindset, because really that's what's going to, make us all go through those challenging times, right? So we've seen, starting in 2022, and certainly we can expect the same in 2023, regulators being really focused on avoiding consumer harm, right? So that's something we've seen throughout, from both in the UK and Europe, and I'm sure in the US as well. And it's really not to be seen as something that the compliance teams needs to handle. This needs to be embedded properly throughout the organization, and really, the companies and firms having a proper compliance culture, right? So exactly as Eugenie was saying, sort of a second nature almost of thinking about, how different products or services or a new initiative, how is that going to fit with some of the, the things we're seeing out there and the expectations from regulators, right? There's just as much, I suppose, that the compliance team can do alone, right? And we really need to ensure, in terms of looking at the priorities, needs to ensure that we are aligned with the broader team, our top executive, that we have a proper tone of the top message, and then we can count on the organization as a whole to assist us in that mission, let's say.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, that compliance across the organization as well is imperative, because a lot of, compliance, not always the most fun part of the company that everybody wants to deal with, but everybody does. And when we're speaking with compliance individuals, they always bring this up. And it kind of gets lost in translation that before you even do anything, even from a sales or a marketing, you have to go to compliance to make sure it's right. So compliance across the entire organization is really needed. So Mary, I'm kind of curious from you and your perspective, how you're kind of seeing your compliance priorities and how that translates to the organization, broadly speaking, with you and what you're trying to accomplish moving into 2023.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I've been making more use of data analytics, and we'll be prioritizing leveraging from that to do more work and behavioral science. There is a behavioral scientist on my team that is not an expert area of mine, so I'll certainly be leaning on him for that to enhance our compliance program. One of the things that I'm seeing from data outside of our organization is that as we struggle to come out from the pandemic, we're in a bit of a culture of integrity crisis. So data from NAVEX and the Ethics and Compliance Initiative is showing that retaliation rates are really high at the moment. So we're seeing complaints about retaliation, harassment, discrimination, they're all up. And perhaps more worryingly, substantiated cases in those three categories also all up. ECI's data shows that companies are seeing substantiated retaliation at 82%, up from 79%, which was already way too high. So perhaps we've forgotten how to act as we come out of the pandemic. That's a thought from Carrie Penman, who's a compliance and risk executive. I would tend to agree. There was a very short period where we were all thanking our lucky stars, being super gracious and kind to each other as we appreciated what was around us earlier in the pandemic. And now we're back to a somewhat uncivil workplace. So based on that, I think for compliance officers, it is a nudge to us that if you haven't recently, really focus on your anti-retaliation campaigns. For me, this means management sessions, teaching them how to receive reports appropriately, and then making those sessions available to everybody in the business. And this is for multiple reasons. One is that our colleagues can see management being held accountable to our standards. Two is that our colleagues that aren't management yet are the managers of tomorrow, and it's never too early to learn. And the other thing is that it's not just management who can dole out retaliation. It can be extremely hurtful to be ignored and excluded by our peers. And so having everybody on the same page about what can constitute retaliation, it's not just termination, it is not just pay decreases, it is things like microaggressions, not including each other in whole department events when someone has spoken up. So for me, that's a massive priority. And I would give you a nudge that based on the ECI data, if you are a medium-sized company, their statistics are showing substantiated retaliation at a whopping 90%. So if you work for a medium-sized company, it is an excellent sign that you ought to refocus on some non-retaliation awareness, education, especially for management, but my tip is for everybody.
Yeah, thanks for that different perspective on things to focus on, Mary, that things that kind of get lost, because I think the pandemic threw everything out of whack for everybody, and things just have been completely different. But it's good to sometimes refocus on things that were already being made progress on and trying to fix those things. So I think that's a really valuable point. And also coming out of the pandemic, I would imagine that regulators are starting to look at and start cracking down, because there's a tad of normalcy coming back. So that's definitely something to consider. So thank you all for your insights on that. Would love to move on to our next topic now, which is going to be talking about what types of challenges you're anticipating seeing in 2023. So a good kind of segue based on what we were already kind of chatting about there with Mary. But again, based on a survey that we've done here at ClauseMatch, speaking to, again, compliance individuals like yourselves in the audience, some of the top barriers we've seen, and what I hear all the time talking with folks is, there's definitely, well, budgets are budgets, and you either have the people or you don't have the people. It comes down to that simple fact. So are you doing more work on your own and putting on different hats over the course of the day, or don't you? So how do you manage dealing with that? All these tasks and things you have to do, and feeling like you don't have the necessary support around you. What can you do to make that a little bit easier? Because in many cases, it's still very manual, what's going on. So again, manual processes being high on the list there. And then another big one that we found that was quite interesting was disconnected technology. And kind of more outdated legacy systems, which we can talk about a little bit more. But you have all these systems, yet it's still manual, and then you don't have all the folks you would like to deal with all of those things. Seems like a bit of a problem. So how do we manage that? So let's see what the panel has to say about that as we're talking in 2023. And of course, again, another component for you to share your thoughts, audience, please, in the chat. Let us know what you think as well. And let's see if it matches up with what the panel also has to say. So I'd actually like to start out with Conrad here and see what are some things that you're, again, seeing trending right now as you're here at TIE that could be a challenge that you might want to deal with coming into 2023.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Justin. We briefly talked on this, right? So I think coming out of the pandemic and obviously getting into now a situation really which is common again both in the UK and Europe and the rest of the globe around higher living costs, high interest rates, and consumers really struggling. I think one of the main things the regulators will be doing, as we said, is really focusing on this consumer harm and preventing consumer harm throughout, right? From a compliance challenge, is just keeping pace with that, because we know the regulators can be pretty specific at times, but with the overall objective that they're trying to prevent, but at the same time quite generic on how they expect different firms to comply with those requirements, right? So I think it's just trying to navigate through these multiple requirements that we're seeing now, that we're expecting to come, and really understand what those different regulations really means to your specific company, your specific firm, right? Understanding what is the true expectation behind any new regulation or behind the true spirit of different norms that we're seeing. And understanding how you can really implement that efficiently within your company, right? It's really rare for us to see from regulators, as it should be, as the own nature of new regulations, right? A clear recipe about what exactly people need to do. So it's really for the firms to assess that. And I think we're going to talk a little bit later once we reach some of the tips the panel has about making sure your compliance program matches your current reality, the current exposure you might have. So that's definitely something we're looking at. I can say from my perspective at Tide, something that we anticipate and we're getting prepared for 2023, right? Kind of navigating this new, not new world necessarily, but there's new upcoming regulations that are coming. And how we can get ahead of the curve, right? Because we know regulators will set the expectations quite transparently and demand the firms to comply with that.
That's a good point. Obviously, dealing with regulation changes is always a big challenge because sometimes you know and sometimes you don't know, and you can't solve what you don't know, as the phrase goes. So exactly. I'm curious. I'm curious, Dana, if there's, beyond dealing with just changing regulations, if there's anything else you've seen from a compliance standpoint that also might be a challenge that some of the folks in our audience should consider, that you're considering right now, beyond just the regulation aspect, which is a huge component to consider. But is there anything else you've witnessed that, hey, you should definitely focus on this?
So I think a theme that we're talking about is this tension, right, between having limited resources and then like an exploding amount of work to do, and then the threat of regulatory penalties or limitations on your business. So I was actually responding to one of the attendees in the chat, and they were asking, like, how do you reconcile that? Like, how actually do you get what you need to do your job? And so I'll speak to that, and then more broadly to like, how do you navigate that natural built-in tension between getting what you need from a compliance perspective, and then also having a thriving, profitable business. So, and I would honestly love to hear from the others, because I feel like I've done well and then also made some mistakes in this area. But I think the base or the foundation would be putting together a compelling business case. And that could include recent regulatory action against similar companies for similar things. That's what I'm including in my pitch for some software I would like to invest in this year, and showing, hey, this company has very similar risk to us, and they got this order, and it's basically going to prevent them from doing business. They're going to have to invest all this money reactively into all these programs. So if we just invest this small dollar amount per month, we can prevent this. Another thing is mapping out what your team can provide coverage over. So for instance, let's say, again, coming back to like a risk assessment, displaying these are the risks facing our company. And with X amount of people, we can get coverage on this. And what we don't have coverage on, this is risk that is just hanging out, and really clearly explain like what that could mean in real life. Because I think sometimes board members and executives are just like, whatever, this is some other, some compliance presentation. Like, this is not really that real to me, but putting kind of like tangible costs and expenses and ways that the business is going to be compromised if we can't get the compliance pieces right. The other thing is, I would put some time into mapping out how much headcount you think could be saved by investing in some of these tools. Like, for instance, having a nice GRC tool. And again, GRC, I think of as a governance, risk, and compliance tool. It's something you can do your risk assessments, your control testing. Maybe you can put your policies and procedures in there. It's going to be something where it's going to be easier to input. It's going to be easier to update. It's going to be easier to maintain. You're going to be able to pull reporting from it. You are going to be able to easily demonstrate to regulators, auditors, examiners what you're doing. So I think you can make a business case for, if we have this tool, we're going to be able to save X FTE, and I'm willing to, get the tool in exchange for maybe a little bit less FTE. So again, I think there's always going to be that tension between what you would like to have and what you're actually able to get. But those are just a couple of strategies to help deal with it.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there makes a lot of sense. What I hear from quite a lot of people is, what's the return on investment? And what's another term I like is return on invested time of trying to implement something. And how will that help the business at large versus just trying to get more people if you can't get more people. I've spoken to so many people, like, I'd like more people, and I also would like more people to be hired. But if you're hamstrung with that, well, you got to have something to fix the problem. Otherwise, you still have the problem, right? So, it's good to have that.
I think people do understand the concept that as your business grows, you can either hire X more people per unit, or you can invest in a technology solution where you just have one solution and it's going to stay with you, and you can grow exponentially, and you don't have to keep hiring people at that same pace. So I would just continue to drill back to that.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. Before we move on, I definitely want to ask Mary as well, in regards to everything else there. That's trying to figure out what Dana has even mentioned does involve a lot of data and trying to figure out where things go. So I'm curious if you're seeing anything in that regard as a potential challenge, and how are you hoping to navigate it, and what are some folks in the audience, what could they anticipate and should be thinking about in regards to data to figure that out? Data and data in like the behavior space, things of this nature.
I would say that part of my challenge is not giving a great deal of time to that at this point in time. For me, one of the biggest things that I'm thinking on now is some of the Department of Justice guidance. And I won't go into compliance certifications because plenty of people smarter than me have gone into these areas in a fair bit of depth. But pragmatically, one thing that I think a lot of us are grappling with is the guidance or the expectation on holding and retaining workplace data in personal mobile phones or on chat functions on work phones that we may not have access to depending on data protection laws. And you can write policies saying thou shalt not use your personal phone for business purposes. We do not use WeChat or WhatsApp or iMessage for personal communications or for work communications. But in reality, actually governing that, particularly in countries that have really strong data privacy laws in place, and that's pretty much almost the majority these days, pragmatically becomes a very large challenge for compliance officers. How are we actually going to feel comfortable that we have care and control, that our colleagues are listening to us? That for me is one of the biggest unanswered questions that I have now about the recent expectations from the government.
Yeah, I've seen some of the new things coming out from the DOJ. So those are definitely things to consider and take a look at. So appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you all for your answers there. Again, I've seen some folks in the audience participating. Thank you very much. I see good conversation going. So if you continue to share, I see our panelists are also writing in responses when they can. So please continue to do so with the time that we have. We can't always cover everything. So continue those conversations in the chat. But we'll move on now to the next section, which is why we're all here. The 5 tips. This is the most mind-blowing stuff that you all are going to get. This is the main
drum
thing.
roll.
So yeah,
we get a drum roll or an air horn.
We have we'll have the drum roll. We got trumpets, the band from the Music Man is going to come in here in about a second. So it's going to be a good time. But these are the main things. So what's going to happen in this section is each individual here on the panel has a tip for you. They'll have a few minutes to kind of share a little bit about that tip. We'll kind of go down the line from one person down to the other. And then we'll kind of do a wrap up and move on to the last section. So when your slide comes on, please go ahead and share your tip. Thank you.
Me again. Thank you. So I loved Justin's term about return on invested time. That is exactly what I'm going to be talking about in your tip today. Those of you who studied economics may remember the term opportunity cost. We really are playing with opportunity cost when we do just about any compliance initiative. But one of the largest ones is when we issue our compliance training. For every minute that a colleague spends doing our compliance training is a minute lost from their core duties. Yes, our training is important, and I'm not going to tell you to waive it, but what we need to do is get smarter about how we use that time. So here's my idea for you. Instead of having the tone from the top be your chief compliance officer talking at the beginning of the training about how important it is, that they think compliance is important, to do the training on time, speak to compliance, turn them into an adjunct compliance professor instead. So instead of wasting that kind of administrative time, because here's the thing, you have that tone from the top just from their very presence in cooperating with appearing in your training in the first place. It now goes without saying. So there's no need to waste time having them repeat that. Have it speak for itself that they are there, they are committed, they think it's important, and have them teach on a learning objective from your training instead. They can use their own examples and experience to really bring it to life, and it's a little something different. So my tip for you is level up your tone from the top by having your executives think about doing more than just one. Great example of this is to have a look at the McDonald's supply chain code of conduct or supplier code of conduct. They have key tips from executives from all across the world dispersed within that policy document. Why not do that too? So we've incorporated our chief executive officer, CEOs of different business areas, the CFO, manufacturing heads, have that tone from the top sprinkled everywhere and use that time really smartly by having it be something that you're teaching them, not just wasting fluffy time by saying it's important. We already know that it's important because they're participating. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's me. So some of the top priorities we already covered, right? And in terms of the actual tips, I will really reinforce the compliance mindset, which again is something we briefly discussed earlier today, right? So obviously I'm, looking at Tide in a fintech space environment, we and a lot of firms are similar, but really doesn't really matter the size here. To what extent are you really confident that your current compliance mindset and the maturity of its program really match your current company's or your firm size and a regulatory exposure? That's really important for everyone to do, right? I know I can, I'm saying that and I'm hopefully not the one who has this feeling. When you look back 2 years ago, in the last 2 years with the pandemic, everything that happened, it almost seems a little bit blurry, and we have the kind of, feeling that we're still in a moment that we're not anymore. Just the fact that we are, essentially 2 months from 2023 is at the same time exciting, but scary a little bit, right? So when was the last time your compliance function and you as a compliance officer or a compliance professional has really undertook a stop in time and looked at your current controls, the current processes you have in place, and compare that with the current snapshot of your company, right? Maybe the size of it, maybe the regulatory exposure, as we were talking about, the services you're providing or the products you have. With those things, it's really easy to. So if you stop in time, right, and if you take 2 years from now and you look back, right, to today, it might be easy to identify that, yeah, your company was growing, your company was, expanding or having different products and different services. But sometimes it can be a little bit challenging to notice that while you're living the moment. So it's really important for you to do the self-assessment whenever you can, right? And we were talking about earlier about some of the DOJ guidance, and there are some industry best practices as well. Really good exercise, right? The self-assessment about where are we now, where we want to go moving forward with all the regulations we talked about and the new changes and the business strategy and the business plan that your company has. How can I looking at it from a compliance perspective, how can you properly give your executives the confidence that you have the resources that you need, and then you are ready as a compliance function to enable the business, right? Because at the end of the day, that's a big component of what we do from a on a day-to-day perspective. And one of the big ways we can do that is obviously searching for efficiencies, right? So again, we talked a little bit about this already, and I know some of my colleagues in the panel will further explore this. But really, where can you search for efficiencies, especially in a time where compliance teams quite often struggle with, we're not the biggest teams within the company, and we know that, and we all struggling with budget and capacity. So really, what can change from a lowering the amount of manual processes you have, or making the best of the current headcount you have approved, so you ensure that not only you're comfortable that there's no current gaps based on your current regulatory exposure, but also that you're prepared to continue enabling the business as we were talking about, right? So that's very important, sort of the self-assessment and a perspective about the maturity of the program and its adequacy to the company's current situation.
Oh, cool. Okay, I'll go. So I have 3 tips. And I think I've already kind of hammered this one, but identify a minimum of 1 compliance technology solution. That's what I'm working on. Number 2, up-level your relationship management with other business units. I think this is something that we all can, keep top of mind as compliance professionals. When you build authentic relationships with different people in the organization, and you're not only reaching out to them to, let them know that their compliance training is past due, because everyone loves those emails. But if you're building authentic relationships with them, if you're acting as a sounding board, you're acting as a consultant, I think you're really going to be looped into the things that you need to know, kind of claiming your seat at the table, really being a good partner for the business, I think can go a long way in helping you achieve the objectives that you're looking to achieve. And then number 3 is around employee development. And I think you can get really creative here. And when you are developing employees, this can also lead to increased engagement. I know a lot of us are working from home, not seeing each other in person, and engagement is like top of mind for a lot of HR and leaders. So when you're thinking through employee development, I think having an authentic one-on-one conversation with people on your team and be like, hey, where do you see your career path? What do you enjoy working on? And come up with projects that might help them. Obviously there's going to be some work that just has to be done, and we can't just work on, only things that are fun and exciting. But I do think there is flexibility to assign work that is going to be satisfying to people. That's something that's generally free. Webinars, there's a lot of great free resources online. I encourage people on my team to be part of professional associations. There's a lot of great compliance ones, information security, anti-money laundering. I'm sure you've all heard of some of the, global brand names out there. Just attending those events can be good for professional development. Also professional certifications. I know that some people love them. Some people think they're a bit of a racket and overly expensive, but I will say that when I've gone through the process of obtaining a professional certification, I appreciate that it can give a foundation that I might not have learned just through on the job. So definitely something to consider. Those can be on the pricier end, but wanted to just kind of call out how important it is to connect with your team and figure out how they want to grow in 2023. And a little bit of authentic connection can really go a long way in their professional development, how they're going to produce for your group, and their kind of engagement as an employee.
All right, I think I'm next here. Yeah, my tip for everybody is to find areas of improvement through process mapping. So I think a lot of things I've been hearing today is like comments about what tech, to purchase in your tech stack. Justin, I thought you shared some really great results, I should say, around like the top barriers. Like headcount was 16%, manual process was 16%, disconnected tech was around 15%. My advice to everybody is focus on what problem you're trying to solve. There's a lot of tech out there. There's a lot of things that you're working on, and this can be quite tricky, but you can do this with a piece of paper and a pen. I still use paper and pen, and I draw out my processes, and it's pretty simple. You can take things like your reg change process, your policy and obligation mapping process, your risk assessment one, and start drawing the circles out. Like who does what at each specific step? Who are the owners of them? How do things move forward? From there, you can start seeing things at a higher level where you can document like where are the biggest pain points, where are the bottlenecks, what tech supports which specific area, right? And so if you go through this exercise, and it only takes maybe an hour or two with your team members, really map all of these things out here. I think from there, you will identify some key problems, what key capabilities that you're going to be looking for, the metrics you're trying to track, and either shorten those metrics in a way that's really efficient, and the positive outcomes that you're going to drive for your organization. I think you'll have one heck of a business case. So really sitting down and thinking about this with your team. And I put some examples on here on process mapping as you think about, what are the sources needed to monitor, who decides of what reg change applies or not, who does it go to next, what are your key KPIs you're measured on. So this is my advice to everybody. Spend an hour or two with your team, map these items out. You'll get a great view to really see where those bottlenecks lie, and maybe where you want to invest some of that tech spend or hiring. So that's my tip for everybody.
I'm up. I guess a lot of things have been said, right? But I guess I'm kind of just building on what Dominick just said, perhaps more in spirit. I think compliance should be part of the DNA of your business, right? To do it well. But that then also means that you have to know exactly what that DNA is. So if a few things, slightly repeating myself, but compliance has to live in the organization. It's not just about writing the policy and then just filing it away. It may sound silly, but your policy has to reflect the reality in your business. And to be able to do that well, there's a few things that you have to do. You have to, I think, be quite effective in how you get to know your business, really delve into everything. Because at times when you look at topics like environment, when you put ESG into policy, you really have to be able to tell to write the story that your organization is wanting to tell. It has to fit with your business. Another element of trying to be effective is perhaps not being sensitive about the fact that when you are calling on the support or input from another department, that perhaps you're not met with excitement or felt like you're the first priority. I guess we do compliance, other people are doing their job. And maybe sometimes there's a sensitivity around it that we need to get over. I think it's been said, once you introduce a touch point with a different department, make sure that you are relevant, you speak their language, you make them interested in what you're trying to achieve. I guess in a way, the way I see it, everyone in the business is part of the compliance team. They just don't know it. So how do you get them to do part of your work or do it together, right? And that doesn't take away, I think, communicating effectively, all those things. It really just doesn't take away that in a very basic sense, you're meant to communicate effectively what the regulator wants from you into policy that lives in your business, and that still remains true. Again, maybe perhaps a bit basic, but very much still the case.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for those tips. They were all, I think, very useful and also different in each one. So I think it's that was a good summation of things that hopefully everybody in the audience can think about and take away from this presentation today. So thanks very much for that. We come to the last section here. So for those of you in the audience still following along, feel free at this point to please listen in this last section, but also if you have any other final burning questions, please throw them into the Q&A and to the chat so we can get to those at the end. But the last component here is, okay, we've identified these amazing tips. We have all these challenges and problems that we learn about from the past. How do we solve these things? What is out there? What is available for us to potentially utilize to make our lives a little bit easier and potentially the lives of everybody in the organization easier? Man, if everybody thought compliance was making their lives easier, that'd be pretty A-okay in our books, I think, right? So what are some tools that some of you all are thinking of implementing on the panel here? So I'd like to pull that out, but yeah, thank you. And we'll just kind of scroll through there. One of the biggest things is obviously those pesky budgets and having to deal with those and what your CFO is willing to give you. So how do we deal with that? I'm curious, like to start with Conrad a little bit. I'm curious, what tools are you looking at Tide to potentially implement? I'd love to get some thoughts from everybody on the panel very briefly. If you could just share a couple of quick things and then move on, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Sorry, I was just rushing to send my response to one of the Q&A questions. So some of the tools we'd be probably looking at, again, some of those were mentioned already during this panel, but definitely anything that helps with this multiple regulations that we were talking about. So I'm thinking of things such as horizon scanning tools, automatic horizon scanning, right? Things that really takes the manual process out of individuals and leave them to the tech. So we can scan multiple things at once and kind of avoiding human errors during that as well. Policy management is a clear one. Sometimes you can even combine those two, but even if you don't, just having the policy management, or you can have multiple collaboration into the same tool, and just generic GRC tools in general, right? So being able to do risk assessments, moving away from those, sometimes old Excel spreadsheets and using tools to facilitate the mapping of your current risks, which controls do you have linked for that, what's your current risk score, your risk exposure, where is the sort of where the attention needs to be drawn, if that makes sense. So giving a proper mapping, you're almost like a heat map, right, of where the attention needs to be drawn towards. There's a lot of tools that can you assist in that sense. Of course, the one tool to prioritize will depend a lot on each company, each firm, and the current, the biggest challenge each company is going through now. But there's all of those basically things that we are looking at Tide at least, and things that we can look at next year.
Thanks for that, Conrad.
Yep.
Actually, Dominick, I'm curious as to your thoughts. I know that what we're talking about when it comes to tools, you obviously also have one, but you're chatting with folks and they're dealing with budgets. So I'm curious what you're hearing from some of the compliance professionals you're working with. What are they currently utilizing? Why are they looking at working with you? And what are some of those tools that folks are trying to overcome that are still a little manual in nature?
Yeah, there's a few ways to bucket it, and I think it does come down to the organization itself. Like I'm working with some companies that they're tracking over 60 different regulatory sources. They're in many states, many jurisdictions, following many regulators, down to very specific handbooks that they care about. You have a compliance team of like 5 or 10 people. It's hard to keep up with that stuff, right? I mean, it's not as linear either. It's not like, oh, here's the requirements, here's the obligations, map them to a policy, we're done. There's so much that's going on. There's regulatory developments. There's new things that are coming out, like your company's thinking about acquiring another company, and you now are looking at new regulations and obligations you might need to take on. You're working with your executive board to like help them understand like where the market's going, like keeping up with all this stuff. When I see a lot of organizations that are working with many different products, many services, in many different areas, they're looking for tools to help streamline and remove the noise for the laws and regulations that are applicable to them, because there's so much. It's very noisy space right now. And if you can help cut that time down to say, these are the things that matter to us, you can have people focused on other areas of the business. Some other things that come to mind too, it could be, the workflow component piece. It could be getting granular with your policies and how you match those to your laws and regulations. Like finding tools that can really help with that gives great visibility. You can see your gaps very, very quickly and act on them and get your response times down. So I think this comes back to earlier where I mentioned like mapping out your processes a little bit and seeing where those bottlenecks are, where there's a lot of volume and what's taking a lot of time. That'll help you really kind of help you spend your time on which types of tools that you want to invest in as an organization. And you can build on those. And what's really great is a lot of tools are starting to talk to each other and start with what kind of like matters most at that core and start building on those as time goes on.
Thanks, Dominick. Yeah, I think you bring up some good points as I hear a lot of the similar things chatting with folks. Dana, I want to give you the last word, but for anybody else in the audience, if you want to chime in with tools you're currently utilizing today, would love to hear it. Our panel can answer questions as you write them in. So Dana, I give you the last word on this because you've mentioned this a couple times, so I'm curious. I have a burning desire to find out.
Oh, yes. GRC platform to map out your risks, controls, and testing. I'm also going to be looking at ways to monitor compliance. We manage a lot of fintechs, so making sure that their marketing is in compliance. And finally, I just wanted to say, just thank you, everyone who was on the panel, who was in the group, and hope you have a wonderful holiday season and an excellent 2023.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dana. I appreciate that. Yeah, if there's any final questions the audience you have, throw them in the chat. Our panel will try and answer them in the last 60 seconds. It'll be a blitz of answering questions if you have any. But I want to thank you all for attending. I hope that this was very informative, educational, and just a little bit of fun. Try to throw in a little bit in there for you. I tried my best with some jokes. I hope you had a couple jokes. I can't see any of you, but I hope you laughed a little bit. So thank you very much for attending. And again, I want to thank everybody here, all of our experts on the panel, Conrad, Eugenie, Dana, Dominic, and Mary. Thank you so much for all of your wonderful insights and everything. For those of you in the audience, again, if you want to be part of the survey, there is the QR code. Technology, that is the theme. Continue to use it with a QR code. Feel free to do that. We would appreciate it. Otherwise, again, all this information will be sent out tomorrow, as Amanda mentioned, so you can get a second crack at all this wonderful information that hopefully you got here in this hour we spent together. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you to our wonderful panel, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and 2022. Bye-bye.